Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Dayle Childs, and we're going to be talking about retaining salespeople. It's one of the big issues, regardless of what the market's like, because people tend to seem to want to come and go, and they do that for a number of reasons. And we're going to dig into that. So, Dayle, welcome. Thank you so much. Where can people find you?
LinkedIn is the easiest way. So it's just Dr Dayle Childs, Dayle with a nice Y in the middle to make it a little bit different. That's where you will find me.
And this was actually off the back of is it research that you've done, or what are we talking about? You actually gave a presentation at a Institute of Sales Professionals event, didn't you? And about retaining, and I said I got to get you on my podcast.
Yeah, we did. It was run by the ISP and Sales Excellence Hub at Warwick. So yes, it's partly research, but partly a lot of the stuff that I'm ingrained in, sort of within industry and discussions. So
Okay.
yeah, part interest and a part just looking into kind of the latest insights in industry.
Okay, so I've got some questions for you. So sales turnover is often described as part of the job. Based on the research, how broken is that assumption, and why should leaders stop accepting churn as inevitable?
So there is an area of sort of healthy churn. So they talk about healthy churn being kind of around 10%. So, you can't keep everybody. It depends on kind of how they're performing. Are they right for the organization? I think everyone knows that. And kind of that jolt is not necessarily a bad thing. But at the same time, we are at unhealthy levels when it comes to the sales profession. So we're about 3 times what average churn is in other industries, depending on kind of what stat that you use. There's a lot of stats that are out there at the minute, Tim, and I won't give an exact figure because there isn't one. There's not a reliable figure, but we sit at around a third of salespeople are kind of leaving every year. There's talks about the average salesperson tenure being around 18 months. Now, given on your normal ramp-up period tends to sit there around 15 months on average. We're losing people quicker than we'd really want to. They get peak performance and we're losing them. And that's bad, right? Sales doesn't have to be that way if we can do the right things in terms of keeping people in an organization and making them want to be part of a sales profession.
You highlight the true cost of replacing a salesperson can be something like 1.5 or 2 times base salary. What costs do organizations most consistently underestimate or completely ignore?
I think lost opportunity costs would be a big one, right? So every time you have people leaving your organization, you have to hire new people, and there's a lot of time there where you're going to be missing out on relationships that may be damaged, or actual productivity when it comes to purchasing or making new sales, right? So all those interactions that are going on are probably the biggest loss of cost. There can be other things as well, depending on who it is that you're losing. We can talk about knowledge that you're losing. We can talk about the culture that it installs. Does it have knock-on effects? Management has to retrain people. So there's lots and lots of indirect costs as well. But the biggest one, it definitely is going to be that lost opportunity cost. It can be up to 3-4 times the annual salary of a salesperson.
If it takes 9 to 15 months for a salesperson to fully ramp, what does high turnover do to revenue predictability and pipeline confidence? And why isn't this discussed more at board level?
Well, ultimately, it's going to affect what you're able to bring in, right? I mean, if you're losing salespeople, then how are they expected to be doing the numbers that you're expecting to do? When it comes to sort of the board level, why are we not discussing it? Well, people tend to think, okay, well, I gave you a number that I want you to hit in terms of money, and
don't do it.
Yeah, go do it. But they don't take into account the fact that you might have lost people or external circumstances. You've also got the additional thing that everybody's adding on numbers as it goes down. So if a board member tells you they want 100, the next person says, I need that 5% leeway. So it maybe gets to 105. And by the time it gets down to a salesperson, it can be a lot more than that 100. And that can demotivate salespeople if it's considered to be unrealistic. which is going to have knock-on effects on the actual number that they could produce, because they'll be less motivated. So there's a lot of factors at play here. It's perennially underrated. I've had lots of conversations with sales directors who are just saying, well, if they can't make the numbers, I get rid of them. And I'm okay, well, great, but how much is that costing you? And they often don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, I was then going to ask about early exits. From your research, why do so many people decide whether they'll stay or leave within the first year? And what are companies getting wrong in those first 90 days?
Well, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the onboarding is not good. So is your onboarding process effectively helping your new salespeople? Do they feel supported? And onboarding isn't just about how do you do your job, it's do you feel part of the company? So if you're not feeling part of the company, then it doesn't give you so much reason to stay, because a lot of people stay for people. There's also a lot of problems with management within sales. So, that whole Peter principle, often sales managers tend to be the best performing salespeople. And there was a recent stat that actually came out that 86% of managers are not getting any formal training on how to manage. And then off the back of that, that's contributing to a third of voluntary turnover. So we're talking about quite a lot of turnover that's happening because we're mismanaging our employees, that our onboarding isn't good. And this is something that's becoming increasingly important, and will continue to be increasingly important, especially with the next generation coming through, who are they would naturally expect a little bit more than sort of what we did when we first came in the profession.
Well, actually, you lead on to my next question, is that you point to poor management practices as a major driver of attrition. In practical terms, what are sales managers doing or not doing that pushes good people out?
So probably doing part of their managerial job, and maybe that's because they're not necessarily KPI'd against management objectives, it's KPI'd against sales objectives. So a lot of the problem that you'll see is that they're not coaching people, or they're not coaching people effectively. I can't count the amount of interviews I've done with salespeople where they go, well, the feedback's just about the numbers, it's not really about the process. They don't feel like a person.
I think it goes the other way, and it's micromanagement, isn't it?
Yes, you do see that. There's a mix, right? And there's a fine balance. And it's also an increasingly difficult balance with this flexible working arrangement. So relationships tend to be decreasing because they're not seeing people in the office as much. So that it's a double-edged sword, really, this flexible working in terms of their commitment, because what are they becoming committed to other than their own flexibility rather than the organization and the people?
And do you think that from a management perspective, you talked earlier on about the fact that quite often it's the best salesperson that gets promoted. That best salesperson is quite often a lone wolf. That person then gets no training on how to lead or manage people, it just seems to be like one problem on top of the other.
Yeah, it's definitely a composite of things, right? And we all know in sales that, right, you can give people a process, but there's got to be some flexibility in there, right, for how they perform best. And ultimately, if you've got managers who are coming in who have been very successful in one way, they're going to believe that, in their mind, rightly, that is going to be the way to do it. But ultimately, it doesn't take into account people's individual styles, their strengths, their weaknesses, and perhaps they operated in slightly different territories and slightly different product departments, where these skills may or may not be as useful. So ultimately, they don't understand the flexibility required to do the manage. They don't understand the skill set that they need to be utilizing, that in some cases they actually don't have, and they're not being trained.
Yeah, I've seen a number of salespeople that want a deal, and then what they've done is then rinse and repeat. And then when they've moved into management, what they've expected is that their salespeople use their method or whatever it is that they did when they got that, and then when they hear that they need to be helping the salespeople that are reporting to them, they just tell them and say, "Well, this is what I do."
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting, right? One of the best things I've heard in the last couple of years, I think, was about management, is that when you're a salesperson, you would never sell exactly the same way to two customers. You would adapt it based on the customer needs and the customer wants. So, but why is it management any different? You've got different salespeople, different, personalities, different strengths and weaknesses, different wants, desires, different circumstances. So why should it be exactly the same across the board? And that's probably where management goes wrong. There is no one size fits all. You really have to know your people, know their wants, desires, so that you can tailor this kind of stuff to them. And that's missed a lot, I would say.
Yeah, I would. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because you've got the extrovert and the introvert and the lone wolf and the team player, and everybody's different.
Yeah, and like I said, when it comes to your sales team, you also want diversity in your sales team in terms of their ability to meet customers' needs. And sometimes, especially if you're working in groups to within your sales team, which happens in places, you've got more than one salesperson involved in a deal, then you then have a more kind of diverse way of thinking and ability to match some customer needs. And managers really need to understand more of that. But again, it's not necessarily the manager's fault. They're not really trained to understand how to manage salespeople. And the big worrying thing, I guess, at the minute is, yes, we have high turnover now, but if you look at the younger generation coming through, this is one of their priorities. So this could only get worse if we don't start addressing that issue and also allowing managers to have the time, because managers are getting increasingly squeezed. So we need to allow managers the time to manage and coach and do the things and do them well enough so that we can get the benefits out of it.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to come on to that, which is that sales has traditionally been motivated by money. I know I've worked with sales teams where you could basically say they were coin operated. There was you could put coins in the forehead, and that's what would make them work. Yet Gen Z values well-being, meaningful work just as highly. They're looking for impact. They're looking for purpose. How should sales leaders rethink motivation without diluting performance expectations?
Well, it's got to come from the absolute start of the recruitment process. What are you writing in your recruiting materials? How are you trying to match your incoming generation? And purpose is obviously one thing. That's how you're framing the job. Sales is by nature a job that helps people. It helps businesses make money. It's solution based. Of bringing in customers value. So really focusing in on that can make people see sales in a different light, which in some respects sales is still seen as like Cinderella's ugly stepsister, as it is, still has a bit of negative connotations around it. So driving kind of that home and saying that you can actually help people and help businesses, there is impacts out of what you do, then that's definitely something. And one of the additional things where we talk about purpose and meaning, they're important, well-being are important to this generation, but hugely important to them now is CPD, like professional development. And it's not in the traditional manner that we've always gone by. In my day and my father's day and so on, it was, okay, you look to go into managerial positions, look to work your way up the ladder. A lot of them aren't looking for that now. That they want progression, but they want it via developmental learning, to see progression within themselves rather than additional responsibility and management and stuff like that. So, and again, we're generalizing. This is across a generation. There will be iterations. So having those conversations with people is going to be really important. But the stats are pretty overwhelming that this is what they're looking for.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about that, the sort of career progression paradox, which is that Gen Z prioritizes career progression, yet very few of them want formal leadership roles. What does career growth actually mean for this new generation of salesperson?
Well, ironically, they still want money. Of course, money is still a motivator. Of course, it is. But they want development, and whether that's formal certifications or whether that's skill development, these are the things that they're really going to be looking at. Are they seeing progression in themselves, and to some extent more employable because they are better in one way, shape, or form. So there are many kind of there's a much bigger focus on this generation around kind of practical certificates or avenues of quality to show that they are better or to show that they are developing and put a premium on that, as to say.
Because I know that companies like Salesforce, who are customers of ours, they have. I've never found out whether it's £5,000 or $5,000, but they have a piece of money that you can basically spend on your own own training, as well as access to other training facilities. There was a lot of training facilities when I worked at Oracle, and those things I think are the things that are attracting people just as much as the role, the money, the territory, and things like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a lot of what I hear when I talk to the younger generation. That is a lot of what they want. When I'm talking to sales managers, they are struggling. The monetary side isn't necessarily working. So you've got to look at intrinsically what are they motivated with. What actually gets them up in the morning. Partly maybe that's money, but that wider meaning for them in terms of going to work. Is it the interactions? Is it something else that's keeping them motivated? So if you're a sales manager, you've got to be having those conversations with your people. Just get to know your salespeople and understand what is it that's motivating them. And it may well be that you have flexibility around how your incentives, or like the 5,000 you talk about for Salesforce, flexibility in how you operate that. Here's what you use it how you want, as long as it's justifiable in terms of motivation and developing yourself, then great, then that's fine. And that helps to add that flexibility for the individuals, because they will want unique requirements.
Yeah, and that's also flexibility in role, isn't it? COVID changed a number of things, and I think there's a lot of people that before COVID that struggled with they were in sales roles and they struggled with things like childcare. But I think there's a recognition now that that you're employing the whole person, and therefore you need to be flexibility in terms of the allowing people to do things at certain times of the day, but they still put the effort in.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a paradox here with this whole flexible working and working from home to where it comes, because at a point, when does that become detrimental? If you're not ever meeting people face to face, then it can be quite a socially isolating role if it's all done online. So there's a problem there in how that operates, and managing that, I think, is going to be extremely tough and delicate for managers going forward. But it's definitely something that they want. It's definitely something what new employees want. They do want this. And I don't have an easy answer for this. There's not any research that really provide a concrete answer. And I don't know whether there is a perfect balance. That's going to depend on people and cultures.
You talk about hiring strategically around culture, mission, and ethos. What signals should leaders be looking for during hiring to predict long-term retention, not just short-term performance?
So they'll be specific to your industry. What are kind of the skills that they're going to need? Also, it's got to be aligned with where you are, in terms of what you need, and also your ethos. So if they align with you, then we talk about the purpose and the mission, then that's great, because they will then be able to see themselves with that mission and contributing to that mission, and there's more alignment. So that alignment is important. The other thing that I would always be wary of is kind of like in terms of the skills that you specifically do need from them. If they are lacking certain skills, are you able to train them in them? Because if you're not, then there is going to be friction. There's going to be friction in terms of what you want from them and what they are able to do, and then what they are able also, or where they're able to get to in relation to those skills. So transparency is extremely important in that hiring process. But when you're having those conversations with them, try and understand, what motivates them wider to the sales aspect, because you can teach them knowledge about the environment, about the product and the service. And you can train some skills more easier than others. So I would be looking at those, because it's impossible to, we talk about resilience a lot in sales. It's very, very difficult, near impossible to understand whether people are truly resilient over an interview process, right? Without basically rejecting them and then waiting to see if they would come back, which isn't really feasible.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
So research increasingly questions performance rankings and competitive pressure. How can leaders balance accountability with coaching and psychological safety, reduce burnout and turnover?
There's a lot there. So, I mean, in terms of research will always talk about one way or another, are these things that we use good? If we talk about performance rankings, they can be good and they can be bad. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it depends on who your people are. And again, that's coming down to how you motivate people and knowing your people effectively to know what would work. Also, if we're talking about performance rankings and the incentives off the back of that, what incentives are you providing? You know, are they a match to what would be something that your employees would want to get the benefits that you would want out of it? So that would be the first thing. What was the second part of your question, sorry, Tim?
Yes. So research increasingly questions performance rankings and competitive pressure. How can leaders balance accountability with coaching and psychological safety to reduce burnout and turnover?
Yeah. So coming to that second part, and coaching and leadership, again, you have to build a relationship. And also the coaching that you're providing, well, it has to have some credibility behind it. Okay. Don't just look to numbers, look to a little bit wider now. What other triggers might help you understand what they're doing and perhaps where they're going wrong? And if you're providing solutions and talking about it, work with them to do that so that they feel involved in that creation process, but also give them the insights. Your job as a manager is to help them do things a little bit better, give them solutions. If there's something that has worked in terms of the problems that they've been facing, you know, help them and provide that. Transparency and things like that are hugely important. Psychological safety, I think, is difficult to achieve if you are not matching your actions with the words that you have spoken. That's one of the most important things. Match exactly what you say. And if it is by anonymous, make sure that is anonymous and they can fully trust that is anonymous, essential that stays confidential. But also you might want a kind of based environment so that, you know, you're working with others to talk about, all right, well, so-and-so's had this problem, how can we help them? And if you create a better culture around that, then people feel more open to disclose maybe what problems they have been suffering with, and they can get solutions, not just from the manager, but also from the team who might have been successful in different ways.
Dayle Childs, thank you so much for coming on and talking about retaining salespeople. Where can people find you, information about you?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. So Dr Dayle Childs with a Y in the middle. That would be the best way.
Interesting.
Sorry?
With a Y in the middle to make the spelling interesting.
Oh, yeah. My mum decided to be difficult. You won't find that on a Coke can. So yeah, Dr Dayle